The cursed bed, the Alcazar of Madrid, was a fortress of shadows, its grand halls suffocated by a miasma so foul it seemed to seep from the very stones. The stench, a rancid cocktail of urine, stale oils, and the unmistakable rot of human decay, clung to every surface, impervious to the frantic efforts of servants who burned incense in gilded censers. In a cavernous chamber at the heart of the palace, where heavy velvet curtains choked out the sun, King Fernando VII of Spain lay sprawled across an immense bed, its carved mahogany frame groaning under his weight. His body, a grotesque monument to excess, swelled with each labored breath. Obesity had transformed the once slender prince into a mountain of flesh, his skin pocked with oozing boils and slick with feverish sweat. His eyes, sunken into a face ravaged by debauchery, stared blankly at the gilded frescoes above, while his soul, corroded by years of absolute power, festered in tandem with his decaying form. No longer capable of coherent speech, the king emitted only guttural moans, like a wounded beast succumbing to the betrayal of its own body. At the foot of the bed, the marble floor was slick with blood, its metallic tang cutting through the room's fetid air. Mara Cristina of Bourbon, Fernando's fourth wife, knelt there, her pale face streaked with silent tears. Her body quaked, not from the chill of the stone, but from the hollow agony of loss. Her womb, once swollen with the promise of life, was now a barren void. The child it had carried extinguished before it could draw breath. A crumpled, blood-soaked sheet lay at her feet, a cruel relic of failure that mocked her pain. Around her stood a semicircle of physicians, their faces etched with dread, their hands clasped as if to ward off divine judgment. None dared meet the queen's gaze, their eyes fixed on the floor or the flickering candles that cast grotesque shadows on the walls. An elderly midwife, her hands gnarled from decades of delivering life and death, crossed herself for the 5th time that hour, her lips moving in a whispered prayer. The room was a frozen tableau of despair, a silent requiem for yet another tragedy in the cursed bed of Fernando VII. 4 marriages, 3 premature deaths, 1 wife who refused his touch, and a single daughter whose birth plunged a nation into chaos. This was the legacy of a king whose name would be spoken not with reverence, but with dread. His virility, whispered about in the courts of Europe, was no blessing but a weapon, a monstrous excess that shattered the women who shared his bed physically, emotionally, and mentally. Courtiers, diplomats, and spies traded tales of a manhood so prodigious it defied nature, yet this grotesque potency bore no heirs, only sorrow. The royal bed, meant to cradle a dynasty, had become a sepulchre, its linen stained with the blood of queens and the ashes of hope. Isabel de Braganza, his second wife, was said to have died in a torrent of blood, her thighs torn, her eyes frozen in a vacant stare of horror. Mara Josefa Amalia, his third, barricaded herself each night with a crucifix, her prayers a desperate plea to be spared the king's summons. Mara Cristina, the fourth, endured their first coupling only through medical intervention and divine intercession, her body prepared as if for surgery rather than love. Only she, through sheer resilience or grim necessity, bore him a child, a daughter, Isabel II, born in 1830. But that birth, hailed as a miracle, was no salvation. It was the spark that ignited Spain's descent into civil war, for a female heir, in the eyes of half the nation, was no heir at all. The Salic law, rooted in centuries of tradition, declared the throne a male domain, and what followed was not peace but fire, a conflagration of ambition, ideology, and blood. This is not the story of a king, but of a bed, a cursed altar where life was promised and death delivered. It is the chronicle of a body incapable of creation, yet masterful in destruction, and of a man who mistook potency for power. This is the tale of Fernando VII, the Felon King, Spain's last absolute monarch, and the first to drag his nation into ruin from the sweat-soaked sheets of his mattress, a prince forged in envy's crucible long before the rot consumed him. Fernando VII was shaped by a poison more insidious than disease, envy. Born on October 14, 1784, in the opulent but treacherous court of El Escorial, he was a prince by blood, but never secure in his place as heir. The Spanish monarchy, a labyrinth of intrigue and betrayal, was no sanctuary for a child's heart. His father, Carlos IV, was a man of feeble will, more captivated by the thrill of the hunt or the ticking of his mechanical clocks than by the burdens of governance. His mother, Mara Luisa of Parma, was a woman of iron ambition, her sharp tongue and sharper mind dominating the court. Yet it was not she who ruled alone. The true power lay with Manuel Godoy, a low-born soldier turned royal favorite, rumored to be the queen's lover and the puppet master of the crown. Godoy was the shadow that darkened Fernando's youth. A handsome, charismatic figure, he strode through the palace with the confidence of a king, signing decrees, shaping policy, and according to the scandalous whispers that reached Fernando's ears claiming the affections of Mara Luisa. The prince, a sullen boy with sharp features and a sharper temper, grew up watching this betrayal unfold. He saw his mother's eyes light up for Godoy, her laughter reserved for the favorite, while Carlos IV, weak and pliant, bowed to his whims. Fernando's chambers were a crucible of resentment, filled with the murmurs of servants, the sneers of courtiers, and the poison of gossip. His mother's indiscretions, real or imagined, were a wound that never healed. As a boy, Fernando was neither studious nor spirited. He shunned the tutors who tried to teach him statecraft, history, or philosophy, preferring to brood in solitude or indulge in petty cruelties. His education was not in books, but in betrayal, not in governance, but in vengeance. By his teenage years, he was a figure of quiet menace, his dark eyes burning with the hunger not for glory, but for retribution. Godoy was the thief who had stolen his birthright, not the crown itself, but the respect and power it should command. Fernando didn't dream of ruling. He dreamed of settling scores. In March 1808, at the age of 23, Fernando seized his moment. Spain was a tinderbox, its people weary of Godoy's corruption, Carlos IV's incompetence, and the looming shadow of Napoleon's armies. Fernando, with the cunning of a man long practiced in resentment, orchestrated the Aranjuez mutiny, a carefully staged uprising that cast him as the savior of a nation on its knees. The royal palace at Aranjuez was stormed by a mob. Godoy was dragged through the streets, and Carlos IV, broken and humiliated, was forced to abdicate in favor of his son. For a fleeting moment, Fernando was king, his heart swelling with the triumph he had craved since childhood. But his victory was a mirage, for the true architect of Spain's fate was not in Madrid, but in Paris. The treachery of Bayonne. 1808, a grand salon in Bayonne, France, its walls draped in French tapestries and lit by chandeliers that gleamed like frozen fire. The air was heavy with the scent of polished oak and the faint sweetness of deceit. Fernando, still flushed with the thrill of his coup, had traveled to meet Napoleon Bonaparte, the emperor whose ambition had reshaped Europe. He believed, with the naivety of a man untested by true power, that Napoleon would confirm him as Spain's rightful king, cementing his triumph over his father and Godoy. Instead, he was greeted with the predator's smile and a diplomat's honeyed words. Napoleon played his part with ruthless artistry. He plied Fernando with Burgundy wine, flattered his ambition, and spun tales of alliances that would secure Spain to France's side. Servants glided through the room, refilling goblets, while French courtiers murmured pleasantries, their eyes sharp with calculation. Between toasts and empty promises, a document was presented, a simple paper, they said, to formalize their agreement. Fernando, eager to prove himself equal to the emperor, signed without hesitation, his quill scratching across the parchment like a blade across his own throat. That signature was his undoing. The document was no alliance, but an abdication, surrendering the Spanish crown to Napoleon's brother, Joseph Bonaparte. In a single stroke, Fernando betrayed not only his father, Carlos IV, who languished as a prisoner in the same city, but the sovereignty of Spain itself. No blood was spilled in Bayonne, no armies clashed. Napoleon needed only a sullen smile and Fernando's fragile ego. In exchange for his crown, the prince received empty promises, a modest pension, and a gilded cage in the Château de Valonne, where he would spend the next 6 years in comfortable captivity, While Fernando dined on French delicacies and strolled through manicured gardens, Spain burned. French troops marched through its cities, executing resistors and plundering its wealth. Peasants armed with knives and pitchforks rose against the invaders, their blood soaking the fields of Andalusia and Castile. The War of Independence, 1808–1814, was a crucible of sacrifice, forging the Constitution of Cadiz, a beacon of liberty born in the absence of a king. Yet Fernando, the man whose betrayal had sparked this agony, remained silent, complicit, and cowardly. The treachery of Bayonne was a quiet wound, but it bled for decades, fueling a century of wars, exiles, and division. Fernando didn't lose his crown in battle. He traded it like a merchant selling a birthright. He didn't understand the despised. The Spanish people, however, possess a stubborn capacity for hope. When Napoleon fell in 1814 and Fernando returned to Madrid, they greeted him as a savior. Church bells pealed across the city, their clamor drowning out the cries of the wounded. Crowds thronged the streets, weeping and cheering, their voices rising in a fervent chorus of El Deseado, the desired. They saw in him a liberator, a king to heal the scars of occupation and restore Spain's pride. Women threw flowers at his carriage, men knelt in the dust, and children waved tattered flags, their faces alight with dreams of a golden age. But Fernando's heart was not with his people. The moment he crossed the threshold of the royal palace, his mask fell. He despised the Constitution of Cadiz, a document forged in the blood of those who had fought while he dined in France. It limited his power, granting rights to the people and a voice to their representatives. To Fernando, this was not progress but heresy. Within weeks, he issued a decree abolishing the Constitution, declaring it null and void. Its authors, scholars, soldiers, and patriots were hunted down, imprisoned, or executed. Liberal thinkers were silenced, their books burned, their names erased. Fernando restored the absolute monarchy with a vengeance, reviving the shadow of the Inquisition to root out dissent. Newspapers were banned, universities shuttered, and free speech crushed under the weight of his spies and censors. Where there had been hope, he sowed fear. Where there had been dreams of progress, he imposed silence. Spain, which had fought so fiercely for freedom, was shackled once more, its spirit chained to a throne of iron. In less than a year, the desired became the despised. Fernando ruled not with vision or justice, but with terror, his decrees enforced by a network of informants who turned neighbor against neighbor. His court was a nest of sycophants and schemers, their loyalty bought with titles or fear. Yet the true heart of his tyranny lay not in the throne room but in the bedchamber, where the candles flickered and the screams began. The bleeding Queen's Fernando's physical presence was as oppressive as his rule. By his 30s, he weighed over 100 kilograms, his body a grotesque testament to gluttony and neglect. His voice, shrill and discordant, clashed with his hulking frame, while his personality veered between apathy and cruelty. But it was his virility, grotesque in its scale, that defined his private reign of terror. Court physicians, in hushed consultations, spoke of genital macrosomia, a condition that made his manhood not a gift, but a curse. French historian Prosper M. Remy, with characteristic bluntness, described it as fine as a needle at its base, horrific as a fist at its tip, and long as a billiard cue. It was not an organ of love but an instrument of agony, a weapon that left devastation in its wake. His first wife, Mara Antonia of Naples, was a fragile creature of 17 when she married Fernando in 1802. Their union was a political alliance, not a romance, meant to bind Spain to the kingdom of the two Sicilies. Mara Antonia, delicate and consumptive, dreaded her husband's bed. For over a year, she evaded consummation, her frail health and terror buying her time. Court physicians prescribed tonics and prayers, while the palace buzzed with whispers of her failure to produce an heir. When the act finally occurred in 1803, under the watchful eyes of medical attendants, it broke her. She grew weaker, her cough deepening, her spirit fading. She died childless in 1806, at 21, mid rumors of poison or despair. The court whispered that her body simply couldn't withstand the king, Isabel de Braganza, his second wife, married Fernando in 1816 at the age of 19. A Portuguese princess, she was vibrant and hopeful, her beauty a fleeting light in the grim court. She conceived in 1817, a flicker of hope for the dynasty, but her pregnancy was a descent into horror. At 7 months, during a walk in the palace gardens, she collapsed, her body racked with convulsions. The physicians, fearing for the child, performed a crude cesarean while she lay unconscious or, some say, still alive, but unable to scream. The baby, a boy, was stillborn. Isabel bled out, her death a gruesome spectacle of medical failure and royal indifference. Fernando, unmoved, ordered the court to mourn briefly before demanding a new bride. Mara Josepha Amalia of Saxony, his third wife, arrived in 1819, a pious teenager of 15. Raised in a convent, her devotion to God was her shield, her crucifix her armor. Each night, she prayed to be spared the king's summons, her hands clutching the cross until her knuckles whitened. She feigned illness, hid in chapels, and through sheer will, avoided consummation for months. The court branded her frigid, mad, or possessed, but she held firm, her faith a fortress against Fernando's demands. The strain broke her spirit and body. She died in 1829, at 24, still a virgin, her death attributed to nervous collapse. In truth, she died of fear, her heart unable to bear the weight of her dread. Mara Cristina of Bourbon, his fourth wife, was 23 when she married Fernando in 1829. A Neapolitan princess, young and fertile, she was coerced into the role of queen, her consent a formality. Her body was prepared like a sacrificial offering, subjected to medical examinations, special diets, and religious vigils. Their first night was a ritual of horror. Nuns prayed at the door, a priest stood in the antechamber, and Mara Cristina, trembling, endured an act that left her bloodied and broken. Physicians attended with oils and instruments, their faces grim as they guided the king through a coupling that was more surgical than intimate. By dawn, Mara Cristina could barely walk, but she had fulfilled her purpose, conception. In October 1830, she gave birth to Isabel, a daughter, not a son, and the seed of chaos. The king's bed was no sanctuary. It was a scaffold. Each wife was a victim, each coupling a torment. Rumors of rumors and trauma swirled, but the truth was simpler. Fernando's body was a weapon, and his bed a battlefield where queens fell. The palace, once a fortress of majesty, became a house of horrors, its corridors echoing with the ghosts of women broken by a king who confused potency with power. The daughter and the where Isabel's birth in 1830 was hailed as a miracle, a triumph over the curse that had haunted Fernando's bed. But it was a poisoned gift. A female heir was an affront to Spain's patriarchal traditions, upheld by the Salic law that barred women from the throne. To secure his daughter's succession, Fernando issued the Pragmatic Sanction in 1830, overturning the law and declaring Isabel his heir. It was a desperate act, born of necessity, for he had no son, and no hope of one. But every change in the palace comes at a price. Fernando's brother, Carlos, saw the decree as theft. A devout absolutist, he believed himself the rightful king under the old laws. He declared himself king of Spain, rallying conservatives, priests, and the rural traditionalists of northern Spain to his cause. When Fernando died in 1833, the spark became a blaze. The First Carlist War, 1833-1840, erupted, a brutal conflict that pitted brother against niece, blood against blood. It was more than a dynastic dispute. It was a clash of world Spanish absolutism versus liberalism, the old Spain of rigid tradition versus the new Spain of progressive ideals, a rural Spain of faith against urban dreams of modernity. Isabel, a mere infant, became the symbol of a nation torn apart, her name a spark for both sides. The war was a slaughter. Villages burned, families were divided, and the Spanish countryside ran red with blood. The Carlists, with their fervent Catholicism and rural militias, fought with a zeal born of faith, while the Isabelinos, backed by urban liberals and foreign allies, clung to the fragile hope of a modern Spain. The conflict dragged on for 7 years, claiming tens of thousands of lives and leaving scars that would fester for generations. A legacy of ruin. On September 29, 1833, Fernando died in the royal palace of Madrid. At 49, he was a wreck, his body bloated with gout, his skin riddled with infections, his spirit extinguished by excess. His death was no tragedy. The streets of Madrid were silent. The bells tolled from duty, not love. The court mourned with mechanical precision, their grief as hollow as the king's promises. He left the throne to a 3-year-old girl and the nation to chaos. Spain became fractured into factions, conservatives and liberals, absolutists and constitutionalists. The war that followed drenched the land in blood, its echoes resonating through the centuries to come. Fernando left no empire, no progress, no vision, only fear, stagnation, and a kingdom on its knees. His reign was a wound, his legacy, one that would continue to hurt. Some claim his organ was preserved in formaldehyde after his death, a grotesque relic preserved in a jar as a trophy, a punishment, or a warning, but no evidence supports this morbid tale. His autopsy, conducted in the palace, detailed only a body ravaged by gout, edema, and infections. No medical record mentions the preservation of his genitals. The story is a myth, a grim flourish to a reign already steeped in horror, fed by the scandalized imaginations of a nation betrayed. This is the tale of Fernando VII, the Felon King, whose bed was a curse, and whose reign was a wound. His story is a warning, a reminder that power unchecked is poison, and that history, though it does not repeat, rhymes with the cadence of human folly. Share it, for the scars of the past linger, and the ghosts of the Alcazar still whisper their truths.